A very, very good evening and welcome to the In Focus. My name is Ethan Tashobia. I trust you had a very wonderful weekend and you're ready to kick it off with the greater ambitions. Now, tonight's discussion is about sustainable development goals. This Sunday, from this coming week rather, from the 12th to the 14th of June 2019, the Sustainable Development Goals Center for Africa is hosting a conference, SDGs Implementations in Africa, Reflections on 3 years journey. Remember, this was set, these goals, the UN goals were set in 2015, so it's about 3 years that we look into the journey that this has made. On the main conference day, which is the 14th of June, about 6 African heads of government are expected to attend, and they will reflect on the SDGs progress in Africa. Based on the evidence presented in the report, SDGs Center for Africa is making the case that urgent action and commitments are needed in African countries to achieve the SDGs by 2030. Tonight's question you are asking, what is even SDGs? Because I believe there are some people who are yet to understand what these are about, but we also want to understand how far we've gone on the continental level, on the global level, but also on the country level, national level, which is Rwanda. And to help me discuss this topic, I have the pleasure to be joined by a number of panelists, and we also have another one who has just joined in, and quite an interesting panel discussion. But I want to remind you that you want to be part of this discussion. You can tweet us here with the hashtag InFocusRW. We'll be sure that we'll follow up with some of the comments and opinion we'll be sending us. Remember to include this hashtag because it helps us to track your comments and your opinion. Let me introduce my panelists. All right, again, I have the pleasure to be joined by Dr. Bilal Bagasho. I hope I pronounced that right. Yes. The Director General of SDG Center for Africa. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us tonight. After, on his left, we have Annette Muchiga, expert on SDG Goal 5 on women empowerment. She's also from Rwanda Women's Network. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We have John Bosco Nyamazi, Executive Secretary, Rwanda Civil Society Platform. And of course, last one but not the least is Mr. Ford Ndiaye, One UN Resident Coordinator. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, gentlemen, for joining us tonight. Now, let's start it off with you, Dr. Bilal. I understand yesterday, President Paul Kagame, who happens to be the chairman of the board, visited the center, which is based in Kigali, and you had discussions. Would you mind, telling us what the discussions were all about?
Thank you for having me again. Yes, President Kagame, who is the founding chair of the SDG board for Africa, he happened to be visiting the center yesterday. I think President Kagame followed up the center activities and the board activities in a very relentless fashion.
Sure.
So this time around, he wanted to come and see how exactly the center is functioning, and also to discuss some of the major issues that we are expecting to discuss during the upcoming meeting that you mentioned, and also how exactly we would guide these discussions and what are the things that we ought to deliver, as a result of this great meeting that we are heading to. And more importantly, along with this meeting, on the same day, on the 14th, the SDG Center board will have its 7th meeting. So some of the board agendas, some of the, what we want to discuss during the board meeting are things that we always, have a discussion ahead of the board meeting with President Kagame and also the co-chair, Mr. Aliko Dangote.
Sure.
So yesterday, I think when the president came there, and of course, having been there, the discussion was open, and he wanted actually to give us some kind of guidance and some ideas that we should focus on, even after these meetings, for the coming years. And those are the kind of things that we were focusing.
Sure. I have this statement. It will go fast to you, but I expect some interventions from the rest of the panelists. Based on the evidence presented in the report, your report for the center, you're making a case that urgent action needs to be done if African countries are to achieve SDGs by 2030. Where are we as Africa, and what needs to be done?
Well, as an Africa and also globally, we all believe that we are not on track. We are producing reports every year. We're producing indexes at global and national levels, and including the index that we are producing here for the continent. So all these data are indicating we are progressing. We are making some progresses, of course, in domesticating SDG agendas or in conscientizing the SDG concept among the societies. But when it comes to delivering against the deliverables that were set, we still have some shortage. So these shortages are uneven. I wouldn't say that we have similar kind of achievements on every one of them. They are different. They're for a different background, different starting point. But all in all, compared to the other part of the world, we don't have that much information how actually other part of the world would focus into this 3 years thing, but the data indicates that Africa has some issues, and because the SDGs are plans that have to be delivered in the 15 years time, and this plan enable us also to understand where exactly we should be in 2030 for each of the 169 deliverables that we have. We should be able to know where exactly we are at this time. And when we see this, the gap is absolutely apparent. So we are now trying to show to the world and to Africa, implementing partners to understand exactly where we are, and to also give, in a scientific way, how off track is off track, and also how we could have some kind of crash program that will enable us compensate the lost time. And of course, we want also to understand the whole attributes, what exactly contribute to that kind of low performances, whether it is national level performance or planning issues, or development finance, as in the form of ODA or other means that were expected to be chip in to support SDG implementation in each countries. So this report is analyzing all these things, and of course the report, the whole idea of the report is to alert our leaders and our partners at all levels that if we don't change the gear, if we don't do things differently, if we don't put more weight on this thing, we would not be able to meet what we wanted to meet. So this is the time. Any delays may not work. So if we have to do this thing, we have to do it now. Any further delay will actually expand the risk. So
we
that's
all
what
agree
the message
that things are not moving very well.
First of all, let's thank you for having me, and I'm really delighted to be with the other distinguished panelists here. But when we are talking about things, it is important that the general public knows what we are talking about.
True.
This is a bold agenda, which is, if you have to summarize it, which will be around 5 key areas. One is, it's about the people, how you get people more educated, how you talk about their health, their well-being, how you talk about their food security and their livings and so on. It's about the planet, how we really protect the earth or the ocean from which we are having our livings. So it's important, that aspect of the environment and so on. It's about also the peace, how the societies are living in peace in a sustainable ways, and making sure that we all deserve living all the nights and all the days in a society that are just, that are equal. It's also about prosperity, how we help people getting more wealth, being involved in productive sectors and getting money and so on to really build their life. And it's about partnership, the one that Dr. Belai was referring to regarding the way that we implement that. So if you have to forget all the 17 goals, just focus on these 5 key aspects that we are trying to do. It's a bold agenda, and of course, bold agenda requires important means. We are talking about 5 to 7 trillion US dollars annually to get the SDG implemented. If you have to compare, the trillion is, you have 1 followed by 12 zero. It's a lot of money. Of course, as Dr. Belai mentioned, and I had the opportunity to read both the joint report that AFDB, UNECA, UNDP, and African Development Bank produce every year on the achievement of the SDGs, but at the same time also the one produced by the SDG Center. And if you look at their report, 100% would be fully on track. So they rank the 51 African countries. And it goes from Morocco, 66.1%, to CAR, 35.4%. That's the areas in which we are having the implementation of the SDGs. So we are doing progress, but progress is very slow compared to what we have to achieve. So we need to speed up the process of implementing the SDGs. I can't come with some aspects that are important in that area, but really we are lagging behind, and UN plan to have an important forum in September, the high-level political forum that will discuss the progress, and I'm happy also that the SDG Center is putting forward this important conference to dive into what's going on and how we can do. So bottom line, bold agenda, universal one, requires a lot of money. We are making progress. It's slow compared to the pace that we need to achieve the SDGs.
Sure. Civil society, John Bosco, and of course, you're also part of the civil society. Where are we going wrong? In a continental level, it could be on the national level, but let's start from up there. Where are we going wrong? Because I believe what is going wrong in Rwanda is probably 17 targets. If we are not doing well on all the 17 targets, it's not an exception in Rwanda. Where are we going wrong?
Thank you very much for having us. And I think right away from the beginning, Dr. Berai gave a perspective of Africa and how countries are doing. Definitely, the pace is different, and countries are progressing differently. But of course, I'm not aware from what they are saying. Compared to what we really need to achieve in 2030, we are lagging behind. But of course, we've been following the continental trends, but also to our country coming back here in Rwanda. Rwanda has made some significant progress in terms of implementation of SDGs. But first of all, we want to see, as Fodi said, we are in the process of voluntary national review, whereby 51 countries are going to be reporting, and Rwanda is among them. So in this process, civil society as a key partner, as well as private sector, we have also been participating in the process. So what, in our position paper, when we were trying to do consultations with our members, this is what we saw. First of all, in terms of progress and implementation, Rwanda has been able to integrate SDGs agenda into national development strategies. Let's talk about national strategy for transformation across these 3 pillars: economy, social, and transformational governance. We see some level of progress. We also look at the local level, at the district level, district development strategies. So these plans are having aspects of SDGs. So also, not only that, but also structural or institutional arrangements. For instance, UNDP and government of Rwanda co-chaired with Minicofin. There is a task force, a national task force for SDGs, where civil society, government ministries, and development partners are part of that. So when you look at in terms of process, for instance, National Institute of Statistics, they have developed a matrix talking about SDGs and translated that into Kinyarwanda versions to ensure that local district level partners try to match their agendas, their priorities with these plans. So I think that is something you see that there is a move. That is in terms of framework, in terms of like integrating SDGs into our national plans. There is, but also in terms of practical progress, we have seen, for instance, poverty levels reducing from 60% to 38% within the year between 2001 2017. That's a progress we see. We also see in terms, for instance, goal 13 of climate change. Yeah. Rwanda has signed and ratified United Nations Framework Conventions on Climate Change. Yeah. There's also the Kigali Amendment on Montreal Protocol. Yeah. And some other different conventions that Rwanda has signed. It shows a level of willingness and being responsible to address the climate change challenges. When you look at, for instance, we are talking about the progress. Yeah. Though we have to look at also the challenges, because we have seen from what my fellow panelists are talking about, we have also seen big challenges of how this is being implemented. For instance, we as stakeholders, how are we on board? Do we have institutionalized frameworks whereby different stakeholders, let's talk about civil society, the awareness, understanding these goals. And when you look at goal 17, it talks about partnership. For us to achieve SDGs, we really need to partner. Yeah. We need to have private sector on board, fully engaged, understanding these goals. We need civil society members. And civil society, by the way, has a role. It is an interface between state and citizenry. And how do we help to popularize the SDGs agendas? So there has been a gap there in terms of how citizens really understand what SDGs agenda. The progress has been made, yes, in terms of integrating these plans into national development agenda, but there is also a need whereby all stakeholders, especially civil society where I come from, to understand, to have the capacities, to be able to popularize and work with the community levels to understand. Let's talk about decentralized levels. How do they understand this agenda? So
that is the issue of inclusiveness. That is the issue of partnership. And that brings us to Annette's concern, which I believe the inclusiveness. It could be women, it could be civil society, but how do we make sure? Have you even, as the civil society, as women, have you asked for your place in this whole, agenda of making sure that we achieve these goals? What has been the main challenge towards the inclusiveness of everyone on board? And how can it be made better?
Yeah, I think that's where I wanted to start from.
Yeah.
Thank you for having us, of course. We appreciate this.
And thank you for accepting to come here on a short notice.
Yeah, very short notice.
Yeah.
But I would say that for me, ownership of this process is very key. And he has talked about people.
Yeah.
People are key for them to be aware about these SDGs, own them, implement them, and hold the government accountable. Yeah. So we need to really invest in making people aware about this agenda, bold agenda, and we can't do it without the people knowing.
Ownership.
And maybe on the gender and women empowerment perspective, we have tried to organize ourselves. We started, I think, in 2017, end December. We reached out to organizations doing gender and women empowerment work. And we got a space where we could train ourselves about the SDGs in order for us to understand them and to understand the SDG 5 specifically, which is about gender and women empowerment, and then to see how it mainstreams to the other remaining goals. Yeah, so we have had different trainings. We have also tried to include media because they are very key in of course, creating awareness, and they have opinion on how things are done, and they can influence. So we have tried to include them in order for us to even have a more loud voice.
Yeah.
And after that, we agreed that for SDG 5, we need to organize ourselves. We can't engage without organizing, and you can't engage when you're one. Yeah, so we agreed that we would form an informal forum called the Rwanda CSO SDG 5 Forum. And this is responsible to see how we are implementing SDGs as civil society, but also a key component around doing research, doing advocacy, holding the government accountable on how they are implementing SDGs. And as Rwanda is going through the voluntary national review, we are very active in trying how far we are, what are the gaps, and what can we do together to make sure that these SDGs are achieved. And so far as a forum, we have engaged on unpaid care work, which is a huge problem for women who provide that hugely. Men seem to be more involved in paid work. Yeah. So the more women are involved in unpaid care work, the more they will stay in poverty, the more they won't be involved in discussions and other agendas happening on the ground. So we were seeing that as a key issue, and we raised that. And of course, we have also engaged on taxes, the income tax that is supposed to be levied on civil society organizations. And we were looking at that as something and how it is going to impact civil society organizations, how are we organized to be able to respond to that. And women organizations are new, still building themselves. If this comes in, how does it? Yeah, so SDGs are very broad and a good thing, but we are taking this opportunity to be able to build ourselves and engage. And recently we have had an assessment on SDG 8, which is around decent work and economic growth, in order for us to inform the process that is going on with the voluntary review. So we found mainly that the minimum wage, Rwanda not having that set for Rwandans to know that if I get a job, This is the minimum.
I can ask.
Yeah.
For a pay.
Yeah, for a job. So that that has delayed due to a ministerial order that hasn't been passed is really affecting workers in Rwanda, and we would like to see that addressed. And we were also seeing informal work, which many women are involved in, and they are not getting benefits from the jobs that they are holding, they are doing, they are insecure. Yeah, so those issues that really affect women, and we are many in this country.
Sure.
When we are affected, it means economic growth is not going to happen. Poverty, we are going to still be under the poverty line, which is not good as a country when we are talking about development and people benefiting from this development. Yeah, so
you brought in quite an element, as if you're complimenting him.
Yeah.
If you listen to what the civil society, the women, Rwanda Women's Network is saying, which I believe is more or less similar to the rest of the continent, there is the issue of inclusiveness, the issue of sensitization. It's as if people across the continent don't really understand. They have not been involved enough in the implementation of these goals, isn't it?
It's true. I think these are the three pillars of the SDGs. The whole idea of SDGs is to see how actually we can manage the trade-off between economic growth, climate change, and healthy climate situation, and social inclusiveness. So the whole process is actually how to manage between these three. Because in the past, we're focusing only on economic growth. You can actually register the recurred economic growth, but that has some kind of consequences on the, in the environment, and also the dividend of the growth is going only to 2 to 5% of the population, and the rest of the population would be left out. So when we talk about inclusiveness in SDGs, it's one of the most important pillars. So the whole idea of SDG intervention, SDG work that we are pushing is to make sure that we benefit from the synergies. We benefit from having all these things together, push them as an agenda. And instead of going, compartment by compartments like in the past, by the mere fact that we are trying to plan together and then implement this thing in synergy without losing those three pillars, then we would say that that intervention is sustainable intervention. So empowering women, or looking for the bottom 30-40% of the citizens, which the SDG is caring about, is one way of empowerment, and then you can call it inclusiveness in a different way, but it is absolutely essential. So that's why we're saying, even when we produce reports now, the index that we are producing every year, we want to translate those indexes into citizen language so that the citizens could understand how exactly their country is performing and where the country stands among the crowd, and also how, with that information, they can put and exert more pressure to their leaders so that the leaders can deliver better and more.
But the issue is ownership, and actually that's what you're saying.
Right.
We are not yet there. It's 3 years down the road, and we haven't seen, because it's also part, I was lucky to see, the civil society position paper. It leaked to me. And, that ownership.
No, the important thing is, look,
how do we make sure that we have that ownership?
Let's look. The whole architecture of SDGs, we need to understand that. First, all interventions, we call them pathways, should be qualified to be considered as sustainable intervention only if they qualify on these 3 pillars. So if you do only economic growth, you are doing something else. That's not sustainable development. Okay? So because we are not only interested on growth actually fail to show the actual transformation of societies. We've seen many countries where growth is peak, people are still on the street. People are having very, very down life. So the whole idea is how to have these three things more sustainable. The second important thing is when we talk about national level performances in SDGs, unlike the MDGs, the programs, when they are crafted, there are two levels of programs. 58% of the SDGs are national level activities. 42% of SDGs are global issues. So a country to perform, a country has to go beyond its national obligation and see how we can save the globe together on the planet, on the biodiversity, life under ocean. All these kind of issues are global nature issues. So that's how we actually assess performance of countries. It is not how we make on education or health. This is absolutely a bet that we want to take on. But we also have responsibility to save the planet, together with the rest of the world. So those kind of issues have been part of the SDG targets, part of the SDG indicators, and also all these countries, 193 countries, sign on to be able to be part of the global as well as national SDG performance. So that's another thing that we need to take into account. When it comes to issues that Rwanda is facing, they are not exceptional for Rwanda, as exactly been mentioned. Some of these issues are structural issues. Some of these issues are resource issues. Some of these issues are also capacity issues. And more importantly, some of these issues have to do with how you can empower the society in persistent way with the right information so that they can be able to contribute to the SDG performance in their own way. Because every single pathways are actually taken, human being as a center. It is human being who contribute to the bad performances and the climate mess and all this kind of thing, and it's human being that also rescue it. So when we talk human being, it's not a group of people who are only running turnkey projects at industry level. These are people who are at the grassroots level, who are managing their the natural base, resource base that lead to all kind of resource regeneration. These are the people who need to be aware of what is going on, and we need to empower them. So I think it's not an exceptional case. In fact, in many ways, Rwanda has been advanced, in the planning and the district level, empowering processes. But there are certain things that requires some kind of time, to be able to have a competent system which is structurally also, transformed.
How do we move forward, Mr. Ndiaye?
I do think that one of the overarching principles of the SDGs is the principle of leaving no one behind. So we need to unpack that. Who are left behind? Are they young people, people with disability, women, youth, elderly, and so on? Things are happening at community level. These are individuals. You need to know what are their needs and how we cater for their needs. And that's the important part of inclusive and green growth, because you have the three pillars of economic, social, and environmental aspect of the growth. So that's an important piece of the Agenda 2030. But I don't want us, before coming back to Rwanda's case, to leave with the fact that Africa is, not playing the right game.
Is it because we don't have enough resources?
Exactly.
Is it because of the education and all that?
Yeah, I must highlight two or three things that are very important. One is the fact that for Africa, this is the only continent during the discussion on the post-2015 agenda did come with a common African position paper. This is the only continent. The second is Africa has its own agenda, which African Union Agenda 2063, the Africa we want. And even the African Development Bank has what they called Hi-Fi, which is, lighting up, empower Africa, feed Africa, industrialize Africa, integrate Africa, and improve the people standard of living. UNDP has done a job trying to figure out what is the congruence between the three important agenda for the continent. We came up with a congruence of 83% to 90%. So we have a clear agenda. That's another thing which is important. The third element, which is important, more and more we are seeing political will and leadership. You know that in Kigali we had this African continental free trade area. It's a big market, 1.2 billion and 2.5 billion of GDP that is important in that matter. So now coming to Rwanda. Rwanda has made really tremendous progress in various areas. Rwanda was one of the few countries in Africa which achieved almost all the target of the Millennium Development Goals. But we need, in my humble view, to watch out the following things. When we talk about this issue of the gender, Rwanda is well placed. But we need also to look at some areas of gender-based violence. We have a big program supported also by the UN in Isange One-Stop Center, which is also dealing with that. We need to look at the role of the women in the private sector, which is also where you have gender parity gap in some wages, and also UN is supporting on that with the gender seal in the private sector. That is also an important factor on the gender. When you look at the aspect related to goal number 2, which is related to hunger, an important aspect is how you reduce or eliminate the dependency for rain-fed, agriculture. Even globally in the continent, only 4% of the African arable lands are irrigated. How you go into irrigation, how you improve productivity, how you get to better knowledge and so on. That's also an important aspect in which. Third element in Rwanda, they are putting focus, which is very good, on the services. Because I strongly believe that where Africa needs to leapfrog is the fourth industrial revolution, 4.0 industry. And yet there also, we are not doing very well because the research and development investment in Africa is 0.5% of the gross domestic product, which is half the objective that we have in the African Union 2063. So putting forward that aspect of technology, innovation, investing in science, technology, engineering, and math, starting with the women and girls to get them on board and to innovate is an important aspect that we also need to bring to the conversation. Another aspect that you mentioned is the human capital. Because all this is around how you build your institution, but how you also build your human capital. Rwanda is doing well on the education. We need to do more on inclusive education, people with disabilities. We need to do more on the quality of the teachers, on quality of the education. We need to do more regarding the dropout of the schools and so on. And that's also an important aspect of human capital, reproductive health, stunting. These are issues that the government is tackling. They are aware of that. They are tackling it. But these are issues that could unlock the potential of this country. That's also an important. Smart cities. Rwanda is doing very good and creating 6 secondary cities, which is also related to the goal on smart cities and smart communities and so on and so forth. Last point on the SDGs that I want also to highlight, and it was mentioned by my friend Jean Bosco, Rwanda is piloting the SDG 16, which is access to justice, peace, and institution. Rwanda is among the 4 countries globally piloting that SDGs. And that one also, knowing where this country came from in its history, the aspect of reconciliation, national unity, building a stable and peaceful society with security and all these aspects are important. But let me conclude by saying on this aspect that I said initially, Rwanda, in my humble view, need to watch out 2 or 3 things. One is the aspect that the country has a very well-known leadership and clear vision, aiming at being a high middle income by 2035 and a high income by 2050. But if you have to do that, there are 2 elements in your financing strategy that you need to watch out. Your savings over your gross domestic product, which is still low, that we need to do. And of course, we have this long-term savings schemes that is important, we are looking at. And the revenue over your gross domestic product, which is also, it's improving, but it's still low compared to what we need to do in the investment. But these are key elements. And the last point is the quality of growth. Because Jean Bosco mentioned the reduction of the poverty, which we all applaud. But if you look at the trends, 2014, 2017, the reduction of the poverty was 0.8%, which was not statistically significant. Yeah. So that's an important aspect that we need to look at. How we tackle with the type of growth that we have by making it more inclusive, putting more people to job with the objective of 1.5 million jobs to be created during the NST implementation. These are very important in achieving that. But we can assure you that on the 17th with the UN, we have a strong partnership with the government. We have our United Nations Development Assistance Plan 2018-2023 with 630 million, for which we are comfortable having 352 million to support the country in moving forward this agenda. But we can really be proud of what we have achieved, but moving forward, we need to watch out some key elements that I can,
Those key elements, I wish the Minister of Finance was here. We tried to contact them and they were not able, some that we reached.
Can I add just one thing before you said? They are aware of, there are reforms on the Rwanda Revenue Authority ongoing with the support of the IMF. Yeah. They have this long-term savings scheme launched by the president during the national dialogue. They also have a 10-year financial markets development, which will be looking at how you put forward all these elements. But we need to do more on the venture capital, because these are technology. You need more venture capital, you need the inclusiveness on the financial sector, you need well-functioning financial capital, even the informality of the sector, which is taking its toll. In Africa, it's 8% informal sector, where you need really, if you have to increase and to achieve the SDGs, we need to move from low productivity, low added value sectors to high productivity, high value added sectors. But the financial sector should play its role by reforming that.
Sure.
I think this is very important. First, when SDGs designed and being adopted in 2015, the underlying assumption of financing SDGs is 3 sources. We need to raise resources in domestic, from domestic level, which is absolutely tax, and to some extent also expanding the tax regime or duty is now we have different concept for duty right now in Africa. So essentially, raising domestic resource has to do with this, and also unleashing some kind of capital for investment, particularly when it comes to institutional investors. We want them to see how they can put their resources there. Because SDGs, unlike the MDGs, SDGs are investment projects. Yeah. They are not, like poverty reduction strategies and poverty reduction works. These are huge investment potentials. So that's one of the concepts. The second important thing is we are in agreement to tap the person agreement, which is, dictating OECD countries to contribute 0.7% of their GNI every year through ODA, supporting these kind of global issues. And the third important thing is, of course, the private sector. So the first one, improving and increasing domestic resource, is very limited. The maximum we can do in Africa right now is 5 to 6%. Africa is a 1.7, 1.8 trillion GDP. And 5 to 6% of that is not a big money at all. What we need now for implementing SDGs in Africa right now, we are actually 500 to 700 billion incremental gap every year. And if you come at the country level, 27 countries out of the 54 African countries, 27 countries are low-income countries. And low-income countries, the recent calculation on SDG costing showed that only health, education, and water could cost as much as 14% of the GDP. And 14% of the GDP is about 70% of the budget. Just think if Rwanda or any of low-income countries put 70% of their budget for these three things, and where would the money come for the rest of the activities in the country? So it's just like, I'm using this analogy always. This is like, giving blanket for 3-4 kids, one blanket, and then each one of them are pulling this blanket to their direction, and none of them will cover well. And that's exactly what's happening now. So essentially, the SDG is a calling of solving all the problems that we have in 15 years' time. And that requires upfronting resource. And upfronting resource is not something that can be done only on countries' capacities, because these are countries who are struggling under normal circumstances to have a balanced budget every year. None of these countries have a balanced budget from Treasury. Their budget comes from Treasury, from loan, and from grant. That's how the budget is made every year. So in this situation, expecting these countries to upfront resource and solve all the problems that they have since their creation in 15 years' time is naive, unless otherwise we have, meeting this promise that we have done at global level, and unless otherwise we will, produce an enabling environment that encourage and also give some kind of guarantee and assurance for the private sector to put their monies, as investment, and which absolutely has to do with rate of return, because the private sector wants to see how their money is returning. So these are some of the complicated issues that we have in hand right now. So relegating the entire thing on the domestic resource capacity is naive, if I may say. We need to expand this thing. We need to fight in all directions as to how the international community will also meet its obligation and its promise to support SDG financing. It's extremely important. The other important thing that we might need to look into...
we have 5 minutes. Huh?
Yeah,
yes.
into this thing is one of the most important activity that we are planning to achieve during this upcoming meeting is to see how we can have a fund for education, health, and water for Africa. We believe Africa needs its own funding to support health, education, and water, which is very much related, as Fode said, with food security and making agriculture, independent of natural calamities and natural forecasts. So these three important things are our bets now. We need to meet all the SDGs. We are signed and agreed to be part of the global, commitment in that regard. But we need to see how these three things will be made by any cost. These are the most important three issues that
they are
health, education, and green water that actually support the agriculture.
I was expecting one area, which is actually goal number 16. She's likely to go to goal number 2. But goal number 16 about peace, justice, and strong institutions. If you look at most of the issues that Africa has faced, I'm aware we have less than 3 minutes, but they will help me. These 3 goals. Without them, these are like the enablers of the rest. Security in Africa has been an issue. Justice in Africa has been an issue. Institutions in Africa has been an issue. How do we make sure that we have this? How do we hold leaders accountable? How do we make sure that all the conflicts and the justice and the institutions are working? Bosco.
I think what we need to do as African countries, first of all, looking at Rwanda, and you go beyond borders, as you said, goal 16 about peace, justice, and strong institutions. Yeah. But also, I bring in the goal 17 of partnership.
Yeah.
First of all, this is a commitment of leadership. It's a priority that if we have peace, if people are united, if we address these conflicts that are in communities, I think you are heading there. But there is also another important thing about strong institutions. Yeah. Because we cannot reach anywhere without having strong institutions. Do we have the right people in organizations? Do we have right systems and procedures? Do we have mindset? Do we have right mindset? Yeah. Because it's about mindset. So, which is actually I applaud one of the initiatives that this country has been making, putting in place accountability systems. For instance, how do you use public funds? How do you control corruption? How do you ensure that people are inclusive? So in peace, you will find inclusivity. In strong institutions, you will have strong governance pillars. So what we are saying, if peace, strong institutions, and justice are working out, this is going to help us. The last point I want to make...
5 seconds, because I want to give her some time.
Yes. Yeah, for me, I think it has to be balanced, again, with people. Because like for gender issues and women's issues, there is a very strong barrier in relation to social norms. True. And how the people's mindsets. And like for the case of Rwanda, I think the 1994 Tutsi genocide came from how people were brought up within their families. Yeah. So it needs to be balanced with strong institutions, but people also being taken into a process of changing mindsets, yeah. Changing perceptions, changing the way they see things, and also investing in them, then like mental issues that people are living with. Sure. How do we deal with that? Yeah, so I think for me it needs a holistic approach. True. Yeah, how do we look at a problem from different perspectives and make sure that all groups are included, that we are looking at different...
I'm giving each one of you 5 seconds, like your concluding remarks. What needs to be done for Africa to achieve this Agenda 2030 of Sustainable Development Goals? Let me start with you.
Let me put it this way. SDGs are not new inventive. We are doing the same thing, but we try to do it differently. Yeah. Mm. Second, this requires actually persistent and innovative way of doing things, because at the end of the day, it's about building resilience. Third, Africa is, from the start, its disadvantages, in a disadvantaged position because its starting point is very low. So Africa strives, it needs its own persistent strive, but also it actually need to be supported by international community when it comes to finance, because most of these things Africa try to fix is not the one that Africa messed it up.
So he has taken into some of the minutes. Did you have a few seconds, 5 seconds?
It's very difficult, but
just one statement of what Africa needs to do.
One statement: Africa needs to leapfrog, and putting emphasis on human capital, institution, innovation, and inclusiveness, and really building productive sectors, Industry 4.0. But it will all come to people, even the piece that you are talking about. This is the only way that we could unlock regional integration with this 2.5 trillion gross domestic product that we were talking about on the continent. Infrastructure also is key in my view. But
Sure.
all in all, innovation in all areas,
Yeah.
with strong coordination, vertical and horizontal, and strong partnership and private sector, and putting emphasis on young people.
Bosco,
women.
5 seconds.
I think what Africa needs to do is to understand the need we have, and which I think is regional connectivity. We have Africa Continental Free Trade, and opening up the
Sure. Finish it up, please.
yeah, and opening up like this visa regime
Yes.
to ensure that Africa can be able to trade, to work together.
Yeah.
But we need to come together as Africa and leapfrog and you know and market together. I think that's an important step.
Annette.
Yeah, for me, I think Africa has a dividend of the population that we have, the people that we have. Let us make sure that we own this agenda together, and let us affirm that whatever is being reported there as achievements is what is happening on the ground. That's
Very key,
yeah.
very key. Thank you so much for your time, and that, I don't have to add anything. That brings us to the end of our conversation. Thank you so much, Mr. Belay. Thank you, Annette. Thank you, Bosco. And thank you so much, Mr. Ford and DIA, for joining us on the In Focus. It doesn't stop here. I was not able to read your comments because we didn't have enough time. But I promise it doesn't end here. The conversation continues. Have a good night. Up next is News in English. I am Ethan Tashovia. Bye-bye.